Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Now, I know a lot of us here in America are getting ready for Thanksgiving right about now. And you might be wondering, what do I do with my Thanksgiving turkey when I'm done with it? A great thing to do once you've taken all the meat off your turkey is to take those bones and turn them into really rich, delicious, and healthful bone broth. So today I'm actually going to be making bone broth using a chicken because that's what we're having for dinner tonight. But you can go ahead and do this exact same process with a turkey. You're just going to need to scale up your ingredients because your turkey is going to be quite a bit larger and make you quite a bit more broth. Now there's a few different ways that people make bone broth. Some people make it on their stovetop in a pot. Some people make it in the Instant Pot. I like to make mine in my slow cooker. Now I like the slow cooker for a couple reasons. It does take quite a bit longer. I mean, it's in the name, it's slow. But I really like that really low temperature, long cooking time. I think it really does a good job pulling all of the nutrients out of the bones. I also really like that once I get it set up, it's a very hands-off process. I can get it set up, I can go out for the day, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to think about it for at least 24 hours. It's pretty flexible too, which is another thing that I like. Usually I let my bone broth go for between 24 and 48 hours, but that's a big window. Anywhere within that 24 to 48 hour time period, I can deal with my broth. So to get started, down here in my crock pot, you can see that I have the ends and peels of some carrots and onions in here. Along with our chicken for dinner tonight, we made roasted vegetables. So we had onions, carrots, and some other vegetables. So I saved all the scraps from those vegetables. So I've got the onion peels, the onion ends, carrot peels, carrot ends. So that's going to be a great start to our aromatics that are really going to flavor our broth. Now, I did also go out to my garden and harvest a few herbs. We got a nice big sprig of sage, so that's going to go right in there too. And I got dropping thyme all over the place. And I got a nice handful of thyme. So that's going to go in here too. So you can see we're off to a great start here. We need to add a few more aromatics and we need to add our chicken bones and then we can really get this broth going. So to make a really basic bone broth, all you really need are the bones, water, and some type of acid to kind of just raise the acidity of your water, and that will kind of help pull a lot of the nutrients out of the bones. But I really like to add a lot of these extra things like the herbs and the aromatics in the form of the vegetables like the carrots that we used and the onions. It gives your broth a much better flavor, and I think it adds something to the nutritional value of it as well. So let's go ahead and get our chicken bones added into this broth pot, and then we're going to add a few more little things. So here are all the leftover bones from the chicken we had for dinner. You can see we've just kind of picked all the meat off the bones. Now, the wings, I find, don't really have all that much meat on them, so I usually just throw the wings right in the pot. We've got the frame of the chicken, plus all the bones that we've eaten the meat off of. You can see there's little bits of meat still left on a lot of these bones. That's really going to just increase the flavor of our broth and make it extra delicious. Now, there are a couple more optional ingredients I like to add just because they really help the broth have a richer flavor. I'm going to put a couple bay leaves in. I'm going to put just a few peppercorns. This just gives it a little extra pop. Just about this many peppercorns or so. I mean, it's really personal preference. Now, one thing I do not add to my broth is any kind of salt. I would rather just keep it unsalted, and then if I'm using it in a soup or whatever I'm using it to cook with, I add salt at that time when I'm cooking. Or if we're just drinking it plain, we can add a little bit of salt if we want to. But I like to, when I'm actually cooking and I know what I'm actually using the broth for, I like to be able to control the amount of salt that goes into it then. Now, one thing to note that I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, there are ways that you can be really scientific about this, and there are methods that you can use that probably extract the highest amount of nutrients, and we're not going to do any of that. I'm just kind of doing this like a folk method. I'm just kind of eyeballing everything. I'm just doing it the way that I like it, the way that seems really nutritious to me. If you want something that's really technical and really scientific, I'm probably not the person to talk to about that. But we are just going to make a delicious, rich, and nutritious bone broth. So here's what it looks like so far. Now you'll remember we did add the onion peels, we added the carrot peels, the carrot ends, some herbs from the garden. So that definitely helps with some aromatics and some flavoring. But one thing I do like to do as well is keep these broth bags in my freezer. Now kind of as I'm cooking, whenever I have onion peels, onion ends, herb stems, carrot peels, celery stalks, things like that, anything that would just add a really good aromatic flavor to bone broth, I just save the ends and freeze it. It's just a really thrifty way to make your bone broth extra delicious. Now, I have had times when I don't have any of that in my freezer, and I'll just cut up an onion and a carrot and some celery, things like that, and put them in here. But if you get in the habit of keeping this kind of stuff in the freezer, you're going to save yourself money, because now I don't have to go and cut up an onion. I can just use all these onion scraps that I have. Now I have various herb stems in here. I save parsley stems, oregano stems, all that kind of stuff is going to add extra flavor. Now all of these bags are going to have a little bit of a different mix of ingredients. So each batch of broth is going to turn out slightly different, but they always turn out delicious. So we're just going to go ahead and add a few more handfuls of these various aromatic ingredients to our broth. Put a few of these herb stems down here. I'm just going to pull from a couple different bags so we get a variety. So here you can see is parsley stems. I think these are either thyme or oregano stems. Now into this broth, right now I'm just adding culinary herbs, but if you have medicinal herbs, you can go ahead and add those as well. I know I've added astragalus to this in the past, and that's a great addition. You're going to want to stay away from anything that's going to have a really strong or pungent flavor, but astragalus is a great option. You could put echinacea in here, pretty much just whatever you want to take on a regular basis. So now that we've got all of our bones in here, we've got our flavorings in here, we are going to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar. As I mentioned before, you do want to have some kind of acid that's going to help really pull the gelatin and the collagen and just all the nutrients that are in those bones. That's going to help really pull them out and help them dissolve into our broth. So I don't really measure this. I'm just going to put a splash of it in here. So just splash a little bit of that in there. Then we're just going to top this off with water, and we are going to cook this on low for a long time. Now, my crock pot is a crock pot where the low setting is actually quite low. If you have a crock pot that runs a little hotter, I know quite a few people do have crock pots that run hotter. In that case, you may want to put it on low just to get it up to temperature and then put it down to warm. I'm going to just keep mine on low the whole time. That will maintain a good temperature for bone broth for me. So I don't really put a set amount of water in here. I just add enough water so that all of the ingredients are covered. So we are going to need a little bit more. So this time it ended up being about 12 cups of water. That can vary a lot depending on whether you're doing a chicken or a turkey and just how many ingredients you include in there. So I'm just going to go ahead, cover up the crock pot. I have it set to low. Now it's going to run for quite a while. You do want to keep an eye on it and make sure at some point as it runs for a long time, you might need to top off the water if it starts to evaporate or just really get absorbed into your aromatics or your ingredients that you have cooking in there. But either way, you want to make sure that everything stays covered with water while it is cooking. So I'm going to let this go for I'm guessing probably about a day and a half or so. It's really going to depend on my schedule. As I said, that's what I love about the crock pot, is that it's so flexible. So I'm going to meet you back here once our broth is done. I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then we will talk about some options for storing it. All right, so now it's time to strain out our bone broth. It cooked for a little less than 48 hours, probably about a day and a half or so. So a couple hours ago, I turned off the crock pot and just cracked open the lid so that it could start to cool off a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we are going to basically strain all of the solid material out through this strainer. Then I'm going to put it in the fridge. Now once your bone broth is complete, you have a couple options for what you want to do with it. You can can it if you have a pressure canner. I have never canned it myself. But I know that that is a great way to make it shelf stable. What I am going to do is I am going to freeze it. So actually, last night we had a chicken noodle soup for dinner, and I had this broth going. It had been going for about a day at that point. So I actually ladled some of it out and added it to my chicken bone broth, and then I topped it off with water just to replace what I had used in the soup. I also, when I was making the soup, I cut up some more onions and celery and carrots, so I put all the scraps from those into the broth too. So, you can be really flexible with this broth. You can be very scientific and precise about it, or you can be like me and just kind of wing it, and it's going to come out great no matter what you do. So now we are going to go ahead and strain it. Then I'm going to chill it in the fridge, and once it's chilled, I'm going to pour it into this ice cube tray, and I'm going to freeze it in cubes. You can freeze it in jars as long as you have the type of jars that are freezer safe. I believe the 16-ounce mason jars and the wide mouth pint jars, I believe all of those are considered freezer safe. So you can freeze it right in there if you want. I like to be able to just take a little bit if I want to. The other thing that I do is I like to cook my broth down so that it has much less liquid at the end. That makes it very concentrated. So when I actually go to use it, because it's so concentrated, I can thin it out with water to make it a normal broth consistency. The benefit of doing that is that it is going to take up less space. So when I use the bone broth in the soup, I can take a few of these cubes and I can thin them out with water. It depends on how much you cook it down. You might be able to thin it out basically 50-50 with water. You might be able to do a little more if you cook it down more than I did. I just kind of pop a few in, taste it, and if it doesn't taste brothy enough, I'll add a few more cubes. So it can be really flexible. So if you do have experience canning bone broth, let me know, because that is something that I do want to try in the future but have not tried yet. So just for the ease of sticking with what I'm comfortable with, today we are going to freeze this. So in this crock pot here, you can see that the water level is a lot lower than it was when we started. I cooked this down quite a bit. My crock pot does allow some steam to escape, which is going to allow this to evaporate as it cooks. So that allows me to cook it down and to make it really be concentrated. If your crock pot doesn't really allow a lot of steam to escape, you can turn the lid a little bit. You may have to turn your crock pot up a little bit higher just to maintain that high temperature if your lid is cracked. Another option is that if you want to cook it down like this, you can strain it and then you can bring it to the stovetop and you can boil it on the stovetop just to kind of evaporate a lot of that liquid. That will make it really concentrated as well. So for now, I'm happy with how this looks. What I'm going to do is I am just going to dispose of all of the solids in here. I do want to, in the future, I have heard that some people will take the bones and make bone meal out of them just to really make the most use possible of those bones. That's something that I don't have any experience with. I don't know how to do it safely or effectively. I don't really know anything about it yet. I haven't looked into it. So if you do have experience taking your bones from broth and making them into bone meal for the garden, go ahead and leave a comment and let me know, because that's definitely something I want to look into. I'm trying to minimize our waste as much as possible. But for the moment, I am going to just discard all of this. Now, just as a note, whether or not you skim the fat off of your broth is completely personal preference. I tend to skim most of it off because I don't like my broth to be really greasy feeling. Some people leave it in. You can even chill your broth and blend it up in the blender and the fat will become more incorporated in the broth if you want to. I did use an organic chicken, so I know that all the constituents of this broth will be nice and healthful for me, so I don't have to discard the fat. I do it mostly as a matter of personal preference. Now, if you are thinking about canning your bone broth, look into the safety issues with that. I think you may have to skim off the fat if you're canning. As I said, I haven't done that myself, so I don't know for sure, but that's definitely something to look into. If you are planning to skim off the fat, what you can do is once your broth has chilled in the fridge a little bit, the fat will kind of rise to the top, and that will make it easier for you to skim off. So let's go ahead and strain our broth and get it chilling. So I'm just going to use tongs here to grab some of this large solid material out of here. And I do still want to let it drip into my container because there is still some broth kind of trapped in the solid part, and I want to make sure that I get every little bit. You can see it's kind of dripping down there. Now, if you prefer, you could strain this into kind of a fabric bag or some tight weave cheesecloth. That would allow you to kind of really squeeze it and get the most amount of broth possible. So that's definitely another option. I'm not doing that today. I'm just using my strainer, but that's something that you could do if you want to. I'm just kind of squeezing it with the tongs as I get it out to get every little bit of goodness. All right, so I got all our broth strained. You can see that I got probably about 4 cups. And then I don't know if you can see, there's a little line there. That little lighter layer on top, that is the fat. It's already starting to separate. Once we get it in the fridge, that fat will solidify and it'll be really easy to scoop out. As I said, if you want to leave it in, go ahead and do that. It's just personal preference. So I'm going to take that out. So I am just going to go ahead and chill this in the fridge. Probably not even for that long. Maybe it's just a little bit warmer than room temperature now because I let it cool a little bit in the crock pot already. So I'm just going to check on it in a half hour to an hour. And if it's cooled all the way, I'll skim off the fat. We'll fit as much of it as we can into this ice cube tray. I'll probably have to do a couple batches of ice cube trays. I only have one ice cube tray, which I know is kind of ridiculous, but I do only have one ice cube tray. So I'm just going to freeze one batch at a time, and we're just gonna pop it out of the ice cube tray, and I'm gonna store it in freezer baggies until I need it. So we've got our ice cube tray filled with bone broth, and I've got this much left. So we'll go ahead and freeze the tray that we filled. Once it's frozen, I'll pop it out, put it in bags, and we'll freeze the rest of it. So that's the way I find bone broth easiest to use. You go ahead and do whatever works better for you. So thank you guys for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed seeing how I make bone broth. If you have any other tips to add, go ahead and put those in the comments. I would love to hear how you make bone broth. So I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye guys. See you next time.